So can everyone hear and see?
I can see.
Same here.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So this is a presentation on UX writing and specifically a more newly defined discipline in UX writing called microcopy. And what you'll see in the next half hour of this presentation is that microcopy is very different than product marketing writing. It's less flowery or persuasive and more functional. So I'll start by defining some UX writing terms, and then I'll share some tips for writing microcopy for different UI elements. So UX writers craft and audit all text that appears on the UI. We use voice, tone, and brand personality to uncover the why and how of actions for the user, reduce friction, and influence perception. So research actually suggests that a user's evaluation of task difficulty correlates more with how they feel before and after the task than the actual interaction. So if we look at UX writing through the lens of atomic design, microcopy would actually be at the atomic or molecular level. Anything that consists of one single idea or maybe two combined ideas working together for a small snippet of text. So let's take a look at a few places where we might see microcopy. So microcopy is used for calls to action, form labels and suggestions, tooltips, functional buttons, error and success messages, 404 pages, and loading indicators, among other elements. So now that we've defined microcopy very broadly, let's take a step back and review some general UX writing best practices that will apply in the second part of the presentation. So one principle of human-computer action is that we want our users to forget that they're interacting with a machine and make them feel like they're interacting with a human instead. So the first thing we want to do is to always be straightforward and natural. And we can do this by saying exactly what needs to be said and no more. So while we do want to follow basic grammar rules, clarity and natural sounding voice always takes precedence. So for example, it's okay to split an infinitive or end the sentence with a preposition if it sounds more conversational. Does anybody need examples of what these would be?
Yeah. Yes, please.
Yeah, and I was going to ask the same thing.
Yeah, no worries. So splitting an infinitive would be like saying to boldly go where no man has gone before. So boldly is the adverb, and that splits the infinitive to go. And then ending on a preposition would be like cheer up or run over. Up and over are prepositions because they usually precede a noun or a pronoun.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. That helps a lot.
Nice. So skipping down to the last bit about active voice, the subject performs the action of the verb, and with passive voice, we see the reverse. So one easy way you can identify passive voice is by looking for like helper verbs like are and is. So you still can use passive voice in some rare situations when you want to put the focus on an object instead of the thing performing the action, but it should still be the exception to the rule. So another thing that makes it easier to write more conversationally is to use contractions. These help you write in the same way that you speak. Number 6 can be a little controversial, but basically it helps us to avoid antagonizing users needlessly. We see a lot of interjections in toast messages, and the purpose of them there is to make praise seem more genuine when a user completes an action successfully. But if you use them too much, it can come off as infantilizing. And then consistency is super applicable to us here on Ascendant because we have a lot of legacy concepts that conflict with some of our newer architecture, and there really isn't a uniform way of keeping things updated. But anyways, using the same term to always describe the same schema helps to avoid confusion, and it also helps with translating. Establishing a brand voice informs how we speak, which we now know translates into our writing style. And tone informs what we say, which is the messaging we want to impart to our target audience. So there are 4 steps to assessing our brand voice. So the first thing we want to do is to review and extrapolate your organization's mission statement or any other existing brand documents or client presentations. You can use comments on your company's social media pages, support call and chat transcripts, or user testing recordings, as resources to understand how your users speak. If there are still unknowns, try setting up time with people most familiar with the target audience. So these would be people like marketing managers, product people, customer support, or ad reps. And then once you craft a first draft of your brand's voice, present your findings back to other relevant teams. If you reach an agreement, what you can do is document the brand voice with examples in a style guide. So let's try some together. So service carrier A's vision is connecting people. And so what we're going to do is we're going to think of some voice attributes that they might use to guide their brand. And as you're thinking through these, try to think of personality traits. So I'll start us off with this one, and then I'm going to ask for help. So I'm thinking that with this brand, some of their attributes might be warm, personal, maybe sentimental. So with these attributes, what might be a good brand message?
Maybe something like, it's not about the technology, it's about you.
Yeah, that's perfect. So if the message is around connecting people, a lot of their marketing text is going to allude to ideas of sharing and connection. So this one we're going to do together. Service carrier B's vision is a focus on the technology they offer. So what might be some voice attributes?
Innovate, or it's like happy to be professional.
Yeah, exactly. So professional, maybe also practical and to the point. What do we think their message is?
So with the last one, it was kind of like warm and fuzzy stuff. So maybe like the opposite of that.
Yeah, so instead of something like connecting families, it would be more like strictly about utility and addressing a need.
Yeah, perfect. You're both exactly right. So as another real world example, we have 2 hotel booking sites that offer identical functionality. However, we can see that their brand voices are very different. So booking.com is no nonsense, while Hipmunk is a lot more playful. So I think we can all agree that telecom and billing solutions are pretty dry industries. Our brand voice at CSG leans more serious than congenial or lighthearted, but serious doesn't need to mean formal or cold. And so the Nielsen-Norman Group actually performed a quantitative study on the impact of tone on users' brand perception. So in this example, we have copy from 2 banks. So both banks have a serious brand voice, but Delta has a casual approach and Gamma is formal. So let's read it together and see the difference. So Delta, everything you need and want from a bank. Online and mobile banking services, a debit MasterCard, and standard checks. And those are just a few of the features included at no charge. And then Gamma says, open an account today to get multiple interest-bearing accounts and complimentary and discounted services. So the research participants not only described Delta as approachable and straightforward, on a 5-point scale, they were rated more trustworthy by 0.7 points and more likely to be recommended by half a point. In contrast, research participants described Gamma as dull and intimidating. All right, so time to shift back to seeing things in action. So this one's kind of extreme, but I'll go ahead and read it out loud. So with the first example, what we see before a UX writer comes in and fixes things is, please note that a file already exists for the ID number entered. This fact confirms that you have already performed tasks in the past. As a result, after clicking the confirmation button, you will be forwarded to an identification screen in order to generate a new password. And the most simple way to say that is, we already have your ID number. Please log in or reset your password. And so let's look at Microsoft. We successfully removed Office from your computer. It's not required right away, but we recommend that you restart your computer soon so we can tidy up a few remaining files. So what makes the Microsoft example more conversational is the interjection. And then we also see that they're using more colloquial phrases like tidy up. It sounds like something a real person would say to you. Okay, another participation slide. We're going to practice rewriting these examples to be more conversational. So I'll start. Instead of saying enables, we can usually just say, let's. Let's try the next one together. What's a more conversational way to say locate?
Maybe find.
Yeah, find.
Perfect. Yeah, that's exactly right. How about please choose the preferred payment method?
Choose a method. I guess that's shorter, but not different.
You're definitely on the right track. I think the next step would be thinking about, how can we ask a question that would be more evoking of a response? Like, how would you like to pay? Okay, number 4. This post is now stored locally on your device.
Stored locally just means saved, right?
Yep, it does. So this last one that we're going to do is extreme, and there's room for us to get creative, but let me just read it out loud. The new backend service has been written to the app settings and requires a manual activation.
You could definitely just get rid of the app before the settings require manual activation.
What about like go to your settings and turn this on?
Yep. So what I wrote was very similar to what both of you said. I just said, you have switched to new backend service. Go to your settings and tap activate. Okay, so we ask users to invest in our brand and product in many different ways. Things like creating an account, referring a friend, or signing up for a newsletter. So research actually shows that the best way to get users buy-in is to be really specific about the value that's being provided to them. And then we can also show social proof and encourage trust by quantifying the trust and satisfaction of other users. So in this first example, we received 84% more signups by telling the user exactly what they get out of signing up. Things like case studies, how-to videos, and podcasts. And then in the second screenshot, it shows a few examples of social proof by emphasizing how many other users love using the product. Okay, we made it halfway. So I threw a lot out there, so I wanted to pause for any questions before we move on to Microcopy specifically.
Oh, yeah, no questions, but I think you did a great job presenting this stuff. For me, I think it's gonna just be a lot of practice, but yeah, these are great tips.
Yeah, so what I'm really hoping to do are the next steps after just kind of like introducing this to everyone is to put together a style guide. So, you don't have to worry about, every single little thing.
Yeah, that would be really helpful to have a reference that's specific for CSG.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so we finally get to talk about Microcopy now. And the way I have this organized is that we'll go through different page elements and see how Microcopy can be tailored for each. So we'll start with buttons. So buttons are the points at which users decide to turn their wants or thoughts into actions. We'll be covering 3 different types of buttons, starting with marketing buttons. So copy written for marketing buttons or calls to action should emphasize the value of the action being taken rather than the action itself. In both examples here, we're telling users what they get out of signing up or requesting info rather than telling them what they have to do. So in the first example, the new sign up button received almost 32% more clicks, and the new version in the second example got almost 40% more clicks by emphasizing the value instead of the work required. So one caveat that I do want to point out here is that before making all your buttons really long with descriptions of value, you do want to keep responsive design and localization limits in mind. So yeah, there would be a balance between value and brevity. So the second type of button we'll be covering are functional buttons. So we're used to seeing these in Ascendant forms or in our self-service apps. These are short and direct. Unlike marketing buttons, they don't add value for the user. They just get them to the next step. Microcopy written for functional buttons like search and add should instead focus on being clear, specific, and reassuring. In the examples here, we're telling the users exactly what they're searching for and exactly what they're adding. It might seem overkill and we're lengthening the button for redundancy, but this change is actually very reassuring to users when they're working through like a complex self-service flow, or if they're on a page with a lot of different buttons on it. So just by adding that one word, you can help users feel like they're more in control of the experience. Lastly, we have e-commerce buttons, which we typically see in buy flows. So it's especially important to stick to industry standards for these. So they're kind of a hybrid between the marketing and functional buttons, in the sense that they're encouraging the user to buy something, but they're also taking them through a series of steps to complete a purchase. So studies have shown that straying from these standards actually reduces conversions because they break the user's expectations. For this reason, it's better to stick to something like add to cart rather than getting cute with it. So I've seen examples where, based on the language, I was worried that maybe I was being taken straight to checkout, or my credit card was going to be used before I had the chance to review something in my cart because the button wasn't clear about what step I was going to. So we're not quite done with buttons yet. What you write next to the button can also impact conversions. So before I mentioned that buttons are where users turn their intent into action. Microcopy near the button should then focus on kind of nudging the user to make that decision. So the examples shown here all use multiple atoms of supporting text to instill a sense of urgency, reassure the user of security, and show social proof. All right, we're finally done with buttons and we're moving on to forms. So when it comes to forms, the important question isn't, how much text should we be using here? It's, do the users actually need this copy? So form microcopies should address what might be unclear to the user and what they might be worried about. So our first two examples show a situation where we have too much microcopy cluttering the form. What are some things that you see that we could get rid of? So I'll go first. In this first example on the left here, the field label and the ghost text inside the field are exact duplicates, and we don't need both. So I would say just get rid of the ghost text. What about the second example?
Well, I think we could get rid of all the bolded text up top. I never seen a situation where username and password are not required. So there's an important in even stating that.
Yeah, and in both cases, enter is redundant too.
Perfect. Yeah, that's exactly right. Much of the microcopy here doesn't really add value. And in fact, it actually makes the forms look more heavy or more difficult to fill out than it actually is. However, less isn't always more. So in this first case study, we're just looking at the amount of text and not the text itself. But the first example follows the less is more principle, and the second shows changes made by a UX writer. So what they did is they doubled the amount of text by adding assisted copy and more descriptive field labels. And so with these changes, 66% more users were able to complete the form without any customer support intervention. Not only did customer support receive fewer calls, but users actually completed the form faster. And that's because when we add assistive microcopy to forms, we can answer questions before the user actually needs to go to the work of asking them.
Yeah, really quick. Here, what did they actually do to increase the microcopy? Like, I'm seeing some tooltip looking icons in the first example that I don't see in the second. Were they just like taking the text from the tooltips and laying it out flat?
That's what I would guess as well. So this case study referred a lot to support calls. So I'm thinking they maybe went through call recordings, maybe identified some common blockers, and then addressed that with a new microcopy. And then, like you said, this UX writer in particular likely made the call to stop hiding critical info in those tooltips. And I'm glad you brought that up because we'll actually go over those in a little bit. But does that help?
Yeah. Thanks.
Cool. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. This one might actually answer your questions, Andrew, because we're going to see what exact kind of microcopy is being influenced to is being implemented to influence conversions. So in the first example, both statements are conversational and ask for the same thing. But just by letting the user know that they're almost done with the sign-up process and telling them exactly why they're asking for this information, the product saw a 12% increase in conversions. The second example also improved the retention by adding assistive microcopy that addresses errors before they happen. And so, fun fact with this slide, a UX writer named Joshua Porter, he coined the term microcopy, and that second example is what inspired him to do that. So we should try to get rid of jargon wherever possible, but when we can't, we should address it with tooltips. So the example on the left comes from the Noun project and explains what each format is and when they should select it. So notice that the tooltip is a little longer, and that's actually perfectly fine because the microcopy isn't being given in one like long block. The second couple of examples come from eBay. There's no need to repeat the label in your tooltip. So one way we can just improve it right off the bat is by removing the first sentence. The second tooltip, like the example from the Noun project, it is on the longer side, but that's probably necessary because it's a legal thing. And so just try to take a second to read both. The one from the Noun project is a lot more fluent, right? The one from eBay could be improved by maybe breaking it up into paragraphs or using bullet points. You could also bold certain terms for scannability. And then our last example is this autoplay toggle from YouTube. So the first one's kind of a mouthful, right? It talks a lot about the feature instead of focusing on what the user can do with it. And so we can make it more conversational by saying something like, turn on so a suggested video automatically plays next. Sorry, I lost my notes. So when designing forms, we should always be thinking of ways to prevent errors before they happen. The UX Writing Collective suggests performing regular content audits of error messages and then trying to match those error messages to the corresponding field. And then that's where microcopy comes in, where we add that to reduce the chances of that error message from ever appearing. So let's take a look. Let's take the example to the left. We can find the upload input field and write assistive copy next to the field, stating that the range of acceptable image sizes to prevent the error. We see the same thing in the right example. Another super easy solution that we already do, but is worth pointing out, is that we just need to make sure that all required fields are marked with an asterisk. So errors are still going to occur even if we implement the prevention measures from the previous slide, and we still need error messages. So there are 3 things that an error message should do. It should explain what happened and why, show how to resolve the issue, and soften the experience when appropriate, maybe by saying like, oops, or if you remember Twitter's old fail whale, something like that. So both of these examples say what the error is, but the message to the left is more effective because they soften the experience by taking blame and apologizing for the error, and then also offering a couple common solutions. Similarly, success messages also have 3 key parts. So the first is a confirmation that the action was successful, an explanation of what exactly occurred, and a call to action to continue with the next step. And all 3 of these things need to speak directly to the user. Okay, can you guess how many key parts an empty state has?
3.
Yeah. So empty states should encourage the user to start using your product. And so the 3 key parts of this are a statement alerting the user that they haven't added anything yet, 2, why they should add something, and 3, a clear call to action to add the thing. 404 pages typically don't get a lot of UX attention because ideally we don't want our users to ever see them in the first place. But instead of ignoring the 404 page, we can use microcopy to quickly rescue the user and direct them back to our site. So the first rule with 404 pages is that we generally never want to refer to them as 404 pages on the UI. We should instead use a friendly header like Barnes & Noble does in this example, And the reason we do that is because we don't want to alienate non-technical users. We should also tell the user where they are and provide them a lifeline to get back to the correct path. That might be like a button to the homepage, a search bar, links to common actions, or maybe a link to support. And then, as with error messages, we want to soften the experience and avoid blaming the customer. So our last UI element that we're going to cover, and very briefly, is the loading indicator. So like the 404 page, you want to limit the amount of time that users spend here. But you can also put it to work for you for the short time that the user is there. So users like to see changes in content on loading indicators because it assures them that the process is moving forward and hasn't stalled out. Like the first example, you can share what's happening behind the scenes, even if it isn't literal, because then you can also, in that way, show off some of the value that's being provided. And then the second example shows how the loading indicator can be used to reinforce social proof. So regardless of the content that you choose to enhance your loading indicators, they should always set the mood and get the user excited. So yeah, thanks everyone for attending the knowledge share. We are a little bit over, and I know at least a couple of us have another meeting coming up, but please don't hesitate to message me with any questions.
Thanks, Lizzie.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks. This was really great.
Yeah, I learned a lot.